how different and how different the approaches are when creating a REST API in TYPO3. I must admit, I really didn't spend a lot of time at looking at Tomac's extension before we developed this extension. But it has a really interesting concept that really differs completely from what we did. And it's really fun to be in exchange and to talk about these things. So yeah, let me do a quick round trip. And the goal is, first goal is to not go longer than a half an hour. I hope I can stay in the time frame. But to also get an extension, get a REST API up and running in this time. That's kind of my goal for today. And we claim that it only takes 5 minutes, so I should have about 25 minutes to talk and 5 minutes to program. We'll see if it works. But yeah, let's get started. If you talk to programmers, probably one of the sentences you'll always hear is that nobody would ever use TYPO3 for a headless CMS. That's at least what I've experienced. And they all come and say, what are you doing? TYPO3, there's frameworks, there's Symfony, there's Node.js, Django, and those kind of things. Are you crazy to do it in TYPO3? Well, probably I am, or probably we are, but it has a good reason. I'm going to talk about that for a couple of minutes and then show you what the extension can do. Just to go back in history a little bit, I'm not going to go too deep here, but there was a time, I think, when most of the developers that are sitting here had never heard anything of a REST API, hadn't probably heard of it Ajax or had been using Ajax, but hadn't been using a REST API. And this is just kind of a nostalgia out of a long time ago, where I was in a fight with a customer who said, listen, why did you just sell us TYPO3? WordPress is a lot better. And then I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, it's a lot easier to use WordPress in the backend. We were developing an FAQ extension, and that really challenged me. So I said, I'm gonna create a TYPO3 FAQ extensions that's gonna beat everything that you've seen in WordPress. And so you can see here, this is the backend, and it's a mixture between the typical TCA forms from the backend, of course, but then so you can upload files and do everything. But then, of course, having a completely different backend. So the backend view you have, the backend module, this is not the tree view you have here, but it's an own category view of all the FAQs. And then you have drag and drop functions. You can just move questions from one category to the next. You can do all kinds of fancy stuff. Yeah, and that was, of course, long before I had heard of RESTful APIs. And you probably all know this, but it's the time that you had when you used Ajax mainly to swap content. So you had a backend, TYPO3 backend, that was doing all the rendering. You had fluid templates, you had a controller, and you were sending requests from the front end or from the back end to your controller. It was taking care of parsing the variables, doing everything, then rendering the HTML with fluid, and then sending back an HTML document that then JavaScript would grab and swap at the place that it had to go. It was a better user experience, of course, but with modern technology, of course, things have changed. We're not communicating with HTML anymore. We're not sending HTML documents back and forth. We're actually just sending raw data. And JSON, don't have to explain, is the format you use. And the great thing about this is, and that's what Tomasz was talking about too, is that you're actually rendering the HTML in the front end too. So by using some fancy framework like Vue.js, I love Vue.js, I use Vue.js all the time too, or React or Angular or other frameworks. This is what you get from the back end, good old JSON. And then the front end, the JavaScript application, takes care of converting that, turning that into something that looks beautiful. Well, if you see this JSON, then of course the question should come, well, listen, if this is everything that the backend provides, then honestly, why should I be using TYPO3? And you're right, but then you have things that only show a little part of the picture. Here, I'm going to start a screen flow. This was a progressive web app we created for a clinic kind of type, a help center. And it's completely programmed in Vue.js. The backend is TYPO3. You have a view where you can look at who has to answer the telephone on which weekday. You can download important documents. You can see which rooms are occupied. Here, this is a view with the occupied rooms. Then you could check in a guest, somebody who came into this room. You can even upload or take a picture of the guest to add it to the document and so on. So this is just like a little app, all programmed in HTML, JavaScript, and then placed on the home screen using the add to home screen button. It feels like a real app. There's no round trips. Everything's smooth. It's really fun to use. Great. But this progressive web app is only half of the story, of course. The other half is that, of course, the client has a web page. It's a TYPO3 web page. And in this web page, he's adding content, he's editing things. They have different users, user rights and everything. And the back end of TYPO3 is just a great place to be. It's, I think, one of the greatest things that's that's around there, out there. To be honest, I haven't seen a CMS that uses or has a tree view in this intelligent way. And if you ever had to, or if you ever were forced to work in WordPress, then probably it's going to be the first thing you miss, the page tree. But it has a lot more to offer, of course. And if you then decide, or you have to decide to create a progressive web app, you really start thinking, does it make sense to install another system? Does it make sense to have another system on your server? Or wouldn't it be great to have everything centralized in one system? So in this example, if the client would like to add a new room that you can check into, then he can just use the back end. He can use the normal list view and say, add a new entry, and here's the new room. So that's a pretty great thing. And then, of course, you have all the nice features that you would have to install, or you'd have to find additional extensions or plugins for. You have the file abstract layer, the file, which is, it's something that we've gotten used to completely in TYPO3. It's just work with it. But if you ever had to work in other systems, WordPress, you'll say, God, this is totally crazy that they haven't really found a good solution up until now. You have the TCA, for defining forms and the backend, and TCA it's great. You have everything you need. You can have rich text editors just with a couple of lines of code. You can have file relations. Things have gotten so wonderfully easy to add in the backend. It's perfect. Multi-domain languages, user management. I really don't know many CMSs who have such a great user management. You have visibilities with all your records. You can say, show a certain record at a certain time, make it disappear again, and so on. So all these features are things that you would have to either build yourself or find plugins for if you're using Node.js, or if you're using whatever framework you're using. So that's one of the main motivations for us to always come back to TYPO3. Another example now, this is another extreme. We created a progressive web app for the retail. And the idea is that if you're in a shop, in a physical shop, then you have hang tags where you can scan a QR code that will then open this progressive web app. And then you can start your own collection. You can collect products, things that you find interesting. So here we just collected this first bicycle. You can also use a QR code scanner that's implemented inside of the progressive web app, nice JavaScript library. And this way you can just keep on walking through the store and picking everything that you find interesting, every item that you find interesting in your own collection. And then you can, of course, at home, dive into details, see what features the bike has. You can share it, you can favorite it, like it, and so on. You can watch videos. So there are a lot of features here. Now, the thing that's special about this is we're actually talking about a TYPO3 backend, and not a single template here, not a single view was rendered with Fluid. And we're even using Mask, the extension Mask in the backend, to structure these cards. So if you open a card, if you open one of these cards and see the content elements, then we have created mask elements to actually fill content onto a card. And yeah, TYPO3 does not do any rendering. It's all done in Vue.js. So the mask element is then converted into a JSON. The JSON is sent to the front end, and the front end takes care of the rendering. Yeah, that's something, probably you wouldn't think of TYPO3 backend here, but it really increased the speed that we could create this progressive web app in. If we would have had to program a content management system to fill these cards, it would have been totally crazy. Mask, I think personally, is one of the greatest extensions out there. It's just wonderful, beautiful extension. It makes life really, really easy. So a big compliment to the team of Mask. I really, really appreciate that work. Great. Okay. Yeah, then let's look at the REST API. And if you look at the code, you'll probably see, or look at the concept, not the code, the concept. You'll probably see that we've been doing a lot of research before we developed it, because in principle, we've been taking the best of all headless extensions that we could find out there and trying to put them into one extension that will make our lives easier. And yet, just so you know what NN stands for, it's 99 Degrees, which is our design company here, agency here. That's why all our extensions have this prefix NN. Okay. Typical problems that you have when you create a RESTful API, and Macopedia will probably say, yep, exactly the problems we had to handle. First thing is you have to take care of the routing. So when you create some endpoint somewhere, some URI, you have to make sure that this URI gets connected to your controller, to your method. Then, of course, you have to somehow make sure that not everybody can access it, because imagine you have a front end that will be able to add news, TT news entries, TX news entries. But then, of course, you don't want everybody in the world to be able to access that. So you have to have some way to restrict access. Then the most basic task you have is creating records, reading records from the database. Then something not that trivial is, how do you get files uploaded? Because again, you have your Vue.js front end, JavaScript, and it might sound pretty trivial. You say, well, I can just use the file upload. But then on the other hand, you have the TYPO3 backend that does not persist a file reference if your record does not have a UID. So we'll have to look at that just for a couple of minutes, and I'll show you what our concept was. It's I think, a completely different concept than most extensions have. Well, and then one of the last point, which is, I think, the most frustrating and difficult task, get the people to donate. I don't know why. We have this rule. We said in the extension manual, we said, if this extension really helps you, €1, just €1. We don't want more, just €1 for every time this extension has helped you. And up until now, there's not been a single donation. There have been almost 1,000 downloads, but no donation, except from the TYPO3 GmbH. And thank you, this place. Really nice for you to donate. They said they were so happy with the documentation. They said great documentation that they said that has to be rewarded. So that was at least very motivating. But if we're done here, then maybe the only thing I would really, really be happy if you could do is just like it. That's something really stupid. It's one click. But if you look at how many likes the TYPO3 extensions get, it's really, really sad, because I don't know, but I think that's something that we all should start doing, like Mask, like the old grid elements, which is going to disappear in a couple of months, like news, and so on. So that would be great. But before I get into it, just to kind of boast at this point, we really spent a lot of time to write a really, really good documentation. And that's why I'm not going to dive into everything here. It's going to just be too long and too much time. Have a look. We have an introduction about what is a RESTful API. We have not only instructions how to install, we have a short video here too. Then, of course, there's instructions for everything, how to do the routing, how to create responses, how to use the annotations. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. You can also add custom annotations if you like. So everything has examples, it has example codes, it has everything. And then to make it really cool, you'll find here one area called examples and recipes. And we took the time to not only show how to do file uploads, how to do authentication, log in a front-end user, but also to show how to do it in jQuery, in Axios, in JavaScript using the modern JavaScript, or in the old JavaScript in case you have to still support Internet Explorer. So there's everything there. And then you even have links to CodePen with every example. So there's no excuses to really get into here and to really get started. It's I think one of the best documentations, if I may boast at this point. So, okay, let's go back. Yeah, installation. Okay, plan is for now. I'm just gonna run through the basic concepts, show it on in Acrobat, and then I'm going to use the rest of the time to go over and really show you an example. Okay, so what do you have to do to get it up and running? Well, of course, install the nnrest API. nnrest API depends on NN helpers, and I'll have to talk about that in just a moment. Okay, then you do what you always do. You add the TypoScript template, and then there are two things that not all extensions need. We need to import a short YAML script into your site configuration, and then maybe, this is not something that will happen on all servers, but I recommend doing it anyway, you'll have to modify 2 lines in the htaccess file. We have to add 2 lines in the htaccess file. Why we have to do that, you'll see that later. So, yeah, I personally really hate it if people write extensions that depend on other extensions. It's something, I think it's always so ugly. You look into your extension folder and suddenly an extension appears that you didn't install. And so at this point, sorry about that, but NN Helpers is I think one of the most important extensions that we've developed for us in the last 8 years, 9 years, I don't know. We started developing it in version 6 of TYPO3. And the main motivation was that we noticed that things were changing in the core, and we were kind of annoyed that every time there was a good update, don't understand me wrong, it's great what the core team is doing, but every time they had a new concept, we had to go search for the changes and change them in all our extensions. And we've done hundreds of extensions, and it was just really annoying to get them updated. So we said it would be great to have some abstraction of the abstraction layer to make things easy and keep them consistent from version to version. Just to give you a short example, 3 things that probably you all know and maybe you have come across. A really simple thing, debugging SQL statements that were built with the query builder. Yes, there are ways to do it, and yes, you have instructions that you can modify the core scripts and everything, but sometimes, if you have a wonderful query builder statement that you wrote with all the nice XSpace features you have, then you just try to debug it and you get something you cannot read. And for programmers that have started writing SQL in their youth, it's sometimes quicker and easier to find the problem if you have the real SQL state, the thing that actually gets sent to the server. And this one-liner is the one-liner I use most of the time. It's just a wrapper around the TYPO3 debugger utility, and it looks the same, the output looks the same, but before it outputs it, it checks what it's trying to debug. And then depending on what it's debugging, it's gonna modify the output or do parsing or whatever, so that what comes out is the most obvious use case you have, okay? So have a look at it. Even if you don't use anything else, this might be a real lifesaver in the future. Then a typical thing, and this is where it gets interesting with the REST API, you might have tried to have an upload form, just a basic upload form with a file attachment. And then your task was to attach the file to a model or to just simply create a file reference. And you probably came across a script from Helmut Hummel that has a GitHub repository, and he showed like, I don't know, it was like 50 lines of code, how to do it. And then in the documentation of TYPO3, the same thing, 20 lines of code. And I bet things will get easier in the future, but here's the one-liner that does it. Yeah, pass a model, pass a field, say where the image is, and you got it. And you can do a lot more. You can have alt text, and you can have whatever you need, titles, and just read the documentation, you'll see. And then last example, totally stupid thing, but creating a link to the front end. Now everybody would say, yeah, TYPO3 has the URI builder. URI builder, yeah, sure. But have you ever tried to build a front end link from the backend context or from a scheduler job? Well, have fun. Okay, again, Benny Mac would say, yeah, there's a simple solution now, but the problem was this was version 6. And then the concept changed to version 7, then to version 8, to version 9, and it kept going on. And then since 9, it seems to get better. But here, this line has not changed since NN Helpers has been alive. So maybe you get an idea of what this thing is all about. Okay, sorry for the advertising here, but like I say, maybe in the end you'll say NN REST API not interesting, but NL Helpers is interesting. So what do we need to do? Well, most of the configuration is done using annotations. That seems like a little strange concept, and probably the most of you will say, well, isn't there a performance problem with that? Because we have to parse classes. One of the main focuses we had while developing this extension was to really take care of caching. So here, no, there's no problem with performance at this point, because if you hit the clear cache button, we have a hook that in that moment will rebuild the caching table for the endpoints and then never has to try to parse the PHP scripts again. So this is all you need. You just add this strange looking annotation above your class definition. And this class is just any class located in your extension folder. So, okay, that's important. You'll need an own extension for it, but creating one is really easy too. I'll show you how. And then the next important thing is you'll have to extend this NN REST API abstract API. Okay, so that's it. And then automatically the REST API will recognize it, will use it as an endpoint. Now then, the next thing is, of course, you're gonna want to have methods, so that in the end, the idea is, you call some URI, and it will then be routed to this method and give back your JSON. Talking about giving back a JSON, this is really nice about the extension. You can return whatever you want. So the most basic thing you would return is an array, kind of boring, but you could do that. And this would automatically, of course, convert that into a JSON, which is, okay, it's one line of code in PHP. but things are more interesting, of course, if we're talking about nested arrays models. So a real domain model, one that's coming from a TYPO3, or even worse, models with relations, with sys file references, with everything. It's the same principle. You don't have to go in and try to convert that by hand. So you all you have to do is just return the model at this point, and then NN Helpers, thank you NN Helpers, will take care of converting that into a JSON that then can be read from your Vue.js application. Okay, so that's, I think, something very different from all the extensions you'll find out there. And then to explain which URL you need to call, well, there are two ways to do the routing. The one is to not care about it and just use a standardized way of routing. This is something we just invented to make things easy, but like I say, you can also use custom routing. I'm going to show that in a moment. There are a couple of things to know. Well, the first thing is that the function name plays a very important role. You have this prefix get, and this prefix get means that you're actually listening to a get request, okay? Then the next part of the URL will be API. This is defined in the YAML configuration. You don't necessarily need, to have that, but it's good to have it, of course. You could also say, similar to the way Macopedia showed it, you could also say, well, I'll just have a subdomain, multi-domain installation. I have a subdomain api.mywebpage.com, and then it will root there, and I don't need another /API. That's fine. Next part is the entry. So that's actually the class name. You can see it colored here. And then you have example, which actually is a method name. Then in the end, we have the action, which is just the way controllers usually are written in TYPO3. And that's why we said, let's put the action in the end to make it clear. Okay, this is a standard way of doing it. And of course, before you can test it, you'll have one more problem. And that's that by standard, we said we're not going to expose any of the endpoints to the public. They're going to be protected, and you'll have to define the visibility. So just by, again, an annotation you can add here, we can say that this is an endpoint that really everybody who knows the URL is allowed to address and to open. Okay. Yeah. Then by calling this example, we would get this result. So here's your JSON. Fine. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay, but then here, you can see that would be the way that you could, by using the standard routing, you could say, I would like to have another method that will react to post requests, and another one that will react to put requests and patch to requests and delete requests. So again, something that's not that that normal. TYPO3 now with this extension can listen to request types that it usually does not support, and even request types that PHP usually does not support. So this is kind of special and something pretty cool. If you're interested to know more about the different request types, then ask me in the end. I just probably assume that you all know what I'm talking about here, so I'm not going to go on here. But the main concept of a REST API is, of course, that you're going to be calling the same URL every time, but using a different request method to decide if you're creating an entry or updating an entry or getting an entry. That's kind of the whole magic behind a REST API. Okay, then of course, a lot of you will say, well, I don't like that. I don't like the way standard routing is handled here. So then came the idea to say, of course, we should have some possibility to configure your custom routing. And that's how it works. So you can use the annotation again, and you can say, I would like it to be here /crazy/URL. And then it doesn't really matter what you call your method. You could call it whatever you like. And then by calling the URL you see up here, you would get connected to this endpoint. Yeah. Then of course we stole this is a concept we stole from Symfony. We kind of have a different way of writing it, but you can decide, if you like, you can decide which request methods it will listen to by prefixing it with get or get a post, or just by leaving everything away, and then it will react to any request type. Then of course, again, kind of stolen from Symfony, little different syntax, but very, very familiar to people who have used other frameworks. You can also pass variables and have dependency injection happen. So here, really simple example. By now calling the URL /API/user/David, I would get a JSON response with my name in it. Yeah. So dependency injection is here, and great to use that too. Then, of course, request parameters passed in the GET request and the URL can be optional. That's a nice feature too. Just add a question mark in the end, and then it will be optional. Yeah, and then authentication, logging in. Yes, one of the main topics we had, and again, Macopedia already talked a lot about it and talked about the problems too. We have the same problems, of course, too, especially with the CORS restriction. The restriction. Well, usually when we develop a Vue.js app, we're in a local host environment, and logging onto TYPO3 from a local host environment is nothing trivial, because TYPO3 uses cookies, and then you have cross-domain problems with the cookies, and so on and so on. So in a very early phase of this extension, we said we're gonna use JSON Web Tokens. JSON Web Tokens are great. They're kind of the standard too. So there are endpoints that they ship with the extension that allow you to log into a front-end user or a back-end user, and then you get a JSON Web Token, which you can use for your requests. Again, time is not enough to show you, but look at the documentation. There's examples for every JavaScript, every version you can find, and it's really simple. So yeah, have fun with that. And then, of course, you can also define user groups. You can use, I'm not going to go into detail, but there's a lot of configuration options here to really decide and make clear who's allowed to access which endpoint. Okay, file uploads, last topic, and then we'll look at some real code. What is the problem about file uploads? Well, the problem is that if you think of a JavaScript application that runs completely in the front end, then you probably have a big button that says add record or add entry, whatever, and the user presses this button. Now, in the moment that the JavaScript front end creates the interface, you don't actually have a UID. You don't actually have a record in the TYPO3 backend. And that is no problem as long as you're not trying to upload files, because if you try to upload files, of course, then TYPO3 needs a UID. Otherwise, it cannot persist the file to create a file relation. Yeah, there are many ways that other extensions have tried to solve this. Some, of course, and this is a really legitimate solution, some just say, let's force the user to create a record. So he clicks add new button, then there's a request to the backend. TYPO3 says, yeah, here's an empty record, sends back the record is empty, nothing in it. And then I start editing it, I save it in the front end, and then TYPO3 knows where to put it. Sounds great, no problem, but there are other problems related to that. For example, what if the user decides to delete or to abort the process? Then you have some orphaned entry in the database. You might even have some files on the server you don't want, and that's not great. You have to find some way to delete it then again. Some other extensions use temporary UIDs and replace them, and there are a lot of other ways to do it, but we came up with another concept, and this is, like I say, something that probably is new or different. It looks kind of strange, but it works really, really great. We're using placeholders. So one thing about sending JSON is that when you send form data, you can send multi-port form data. So aside of sending your JSON data, of course, you can send file attachments. And the idea was that we wanted to make it possible to really send in one request, send everything that TYPO3 needs to create a model with the file references and everything. And the idea is that you add a multi-part form data part piece. For example, you could call it a file or whatever you like, it doesn't matter. And then you can reference inside of your model, you can reference, or inside of your JSON, you can reference to this by using this upload syntax. In the example on the bottom, you can see that it's also possible to mix both. So you can say on the one hand, well, the user uploaded 2 new files, but the third file is supposed to be already one that existed on the server. Sorry for missing the E, should be file admin, of course. Yeah, so that's the basic way it works. And this looks very simple, but you can also add anything that the file relation has. So alt tag or titles or anything else you need, you can put that in there too by just using an array instead of a string here. Then an example of how simple it is to actually get the model into TYPO3 and do something with it. Again, here we're using a helper function from NN helpers, but it wouldn't be that much more complicated if you did it by hand. So you can see here in this post model action that we're getting the body from the JSON request. It's just this one line, this request get body, and you know this request from all your controllers, all the controllers you have programmed in the past. This is not the TYPO3 request. It's actually a wrapper around the TYPO3 requests, so it added some new fields. One of them is get body, and then it only takes this one liner below to then convert the array that it gets into a model. Yeah, you don't have to do anything else. It's really great. And then, like you see here too, if I didn't do anything with it, I could just simply return the model. Yeah, and then it would convert that back into a JSON. If you have file uploads, two more things to do. The one is to make sure you defined where the uploads are supposed to be moved. We put this in here, we said we're not going to have this just uploaded anywhere, but we're going to force the user, the programmer, to actually define the target. And this can be done just by writing a path here. You could use, one and then colon path, or use a configuration which is more sensible. You have a TypoScript configuration that says API demo means please upload it in a certain folder. It will create everything it needs automatically. So it will create the storage and everything else it needs. So you really don't have to bother. It's just this line, that was it. And then again here, just to kind of show off, you can see, of course, you can use dependency injection too. So by defining that the parameter that's passed here is of the type domain model entry, it will automatically take care of everything, create the file relations and everything, and just put it here in the method, and there it is. So great thing. Then again, how easy is it to persist the model? At the moment this script is executed, if it's not an existing entry, of course, then it will just be something transient. So it's not in the database yet. It already created the file relations, but it did not persist it yet, so it doesn't have a UID yet. To get it in the database, again, great helper function, and this looks really crazy because it's just one line that says insert. What this does in the background is it automatically determines the right repository for this model. Then it does all the rest, it says add to repository, persisted, and so on and so on. But I don't have to do any injection, create, make, what is it? Create an instance of the repository and then do all the hard work. That's all you need to get it in the database. So again, have a look at it now. Help us maybe. That's all I wanted to show now here. And if it's okay to go into code, then I would do that. I think it will only be like 5 minutes, but I've been talking pretty long. So is it okay?